I used to believe that love, real love, was unshakable. That when you found someone who made the world feel softer, who knew your every thought before you spoke it, that was it. You held on, and nothing could break you. For years, I thought I had that with Emily. We met in college, one of those accidental encounters that you look back on later and think, was that fate? She was sitting alone in a coffee shop, hunched over a novel, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. I asked if the seat across from her was taken, and without looking up, she just smiled and said, "It is now." That was Emily, charming without trying, effortlessly drawing people in. We built a life together, graduated, got our first apartment, learned how to fight without breaking each other, and how to make up without losing ourselves. The years passed, and nothing about her ever stopped captivating me. I loved the way she hummed while washing dishes, how she got a little mean when she was overtired, how she'd reach for my hand in the middle of the night, even in sleep. But somewhere along the way, small cracks formed in the foundation of us. Nothing obvious. Nothing I could have pointed to and said, that was the beginning of the end. It was more like erosion, slow, unnoticeable at first, until one day you realize the ground beneath you is crumbling. She started working longer hours. I'd wake up to an empty bed, the imprint of her body still warm, but she was already gone. I told myself it was normal. Jobs get demanding, people get tired. But then, there were the phone calls she'd take in another room, the way she'd flinch when I reached for her phone, the subtle shift in her laughter, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to acknowledge that the woman I built my world around might be slipping away from me. So I ignored it, buried it deep, convinced myself that love, our love, was stronger than whatever this was. And then, one night, she started talking in her sleep. At first, it was just mumbling, incoherent, soft, nothing to worry about. But then she said a name I didn't recognize, a name she whispered with the kind of tenderness that cut through my chest like a knife. That was the moment everything changed. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the name she whispered echoing in my head like a ghost that refused to leave. I wanted to believe it was nothing, a dream, a meaningless fragment of her subconscious. But deep down, I knew better. I turned toward her, watching her sleep, her face relaxed, peaceful, as if she hadn't just cracked open a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through. I should have woken her up right then and asked, should have whispered, "Who is he, Emily?" But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and let the doubt sink its claws into me. The next morning, I tried to shake it off, pretending everything was normal. But Emily felt different. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks. But there was a weight to the way she moved, like she was carrying something she didn't want me to see. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked over coffee, her voice light, casual. I studied her, searching for something, guilt, hesitation, anything. But she just sipped her coffee, eyes scanning the screen of her phone like it was just another morning. "Yeah," I lied. "You?" She nodded, but her fingers tapped against the mug, restless. "We should do something this weekend. Just us." That should have reassured me, right? But it didn't. It felt like an offering, like she could feel the shift between us two, like she was trying to patch up something before I saw the cracks. That day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. I hated myself for it. I wasn't the kind of man who snooped, who pried into things that weren't meant for him. But I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut, the sense that something was slipping away from me, and if I didn't reach for it now, I'd lose it forever. Her messages, normal, casual conversations with friends, work emails, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, I found a contact saved under a single letter. J. No last name, no details, just a letter. And the messages, "Can't stop thinking about last night. I shouldn't have come, but I couldn't stay away. We have to be careful." My chest tightened as I scrolled, my hands shaking. The messages weren't explicit, but they didn't have to be. The intimacy was there, woven into every word, every pause, the name she whispered in her sleep. I don't remember setting the phone down. I don't remember breathing. All I remember is the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears and the taste of something bitter, something final. Emily was cheating on me. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen, my mind replaying every moment I had ignored, every warning sign I had brushed off. The late nights, the distance, the way she pulled away when I touched her, like my hands no longer fit the shape of her body. When she came home that night, I watched her, really watched her, the way she smiled at me, the way she kissed my cheek as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't already given a part of herself to someone else. I wanted to confront her, wanted to grab her by the shoulders and demand to know. How long? Why? Who the hell is Jay? But instead I stayed quiet, suffocating beneath the weight of my own silence. Because suddenly, the betrayal wasn't the worst part. The worst part? She still looked at me like she loved me, and I had no idea if it was real. The truth didn't come out in some dramatic confession. There was no screaming match, no tearful apology, no grand admission of guilt. Instead, it unraveled slowly like a thread I couldn't stop pulling until the entire fabric of my life came undone. I didn't confront Emily right away. I told myself I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. But the truth? I was afraid. Afraid of what she'd say. Afraid of hearing her admit that I wasn't enough. So I waited, I watched, and in doing so, I became someone I didn't recognize. I started checking her phone when she was in the shower, reading every message between her and Jay, memorizing their inside jokes, their coded words. I tracked her location. I analyzed every excuse she gave me. I told myself it was just so I could know the truth, but in reality, I was torturing myself with it. Then one night, the waiting ended. Emily had told me she was working late. Again, I pretended to believe her, kissed her goodbye, then watched from the window as she drove off in the opposite direction of her office. I followed her. It felt surreal, like I was outside of my own body, watching myself turn into the kind of person who tails their own wife through the streets of the city we built our lives in. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight they ached, my pulse hammering so loudly I could hear it in my skull. She pulled into the parking lot of a small, dimly lit bar. I parked a few spaces away, my breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. A part of me hoped, God, I hoped, that maybe this was nothing. Maybe she was meeting a friend. Maybe there was an explanation. Then I saw him. Jay. He was already there, waiting. He stood as soon as she walked in and, without hesitation, without guilt, without even looking over her shoulder, she slipped into his arms. And then, she kissed him. Something inside me shattered so violently I swear I felt it physically. My stomach twisted. My vision blurred. For a second, I thought I might actually be sick. I could have walked away, could have turned the car back on, driven home, and let this moment exist in the shadows, where I could pretend it wasn't real. But I didn't. I got out of the car. My legs felt numb as I walked toward the bar, my body moving purely on instinct. I didn't even have a plan. I just knew. I had to see her face. When she realized she wasn't hiding anymore. I stepped inside, the warmth of the bar suffocating compared to the cold air outside. Emily was sitting across from Jay, her fingers wrapped around a drink. Her laughter, the laughter that used to belong to me, filling the space between them. And then, she saw me. Her face went pale so fast it was almost impressive. Her fingers tensed around the glass, her lips parting like she was about to speak. But nothing came out. Jay turned to look at me, his brow furrowed, confused. He didn't know who I was. Of course he didn't. I stepped closer, closer, close enough to see the panic in her eyes. Don't stop on my account, I said, my voice eerily calm. I'd hate to ruin the moment. Emily shot up from her seat. James, don't. I cut her off, my voice sharp. Don't say my name like you still have the right to. Jay stood, placing himself between us, like he actually thought he needed to protect her. From me. Who the hell are you? He asked. I let out a short, humorless laugh. That's a great question. Maybe Emily should answer that. Emily's eyes darted between us, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. James, please, can we talk in private? I shook my head, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like an avalanche. No, Emily. My voice was steel. We talk now. Jay looked at her, realization dawning on his face. Wait, this is your husband. Husband. I had never hated a word more. The room felt too bright, too loud. Conversations around us continued, casual and different, as if my world wasn't currently imploding. Emily swallowed hard, glancing at Jay like she was silently pleading with him to disappear. Then, finally, she turned back to me. I was going to tell you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I let out a sharp breath, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. When? My voice was edged with something raw. After you were done sneaking around? After you decided if he was worth destroying our marriage for? She flinched, like I had physically struck her. It's not like that, she said quickly. I tilted my head, my voice low, dangerous. Then tell me, Emily, tell me exactly what it is. She opened her mouth, then hesitated, and in that single moment of silence I had my answer. Jay exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand through his hair, his expression uneasy. I didn't know you were married, he muttered, glancing at Emily with something that looked dangerously close to pity. Something inside me snapped. Yeah? Well, congratulations. Now you do. I turned to leave, the weight in my chest unbearable. But then, Emily grabbed my arm. James, please, she begged, her voice shaking, eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't mean for this to happen. I yanked my arm free, my voice sharp, final. No, Emily, you chose for this to happen, and now you get to live with it. Her lips trembled. I still love you. I stared at her, searching, desperate for even a fraction of the woman I had once believed in. But she was gone. Or maybe she had never been real at all. Then why wasn't I enough? I whispered, my voice breaking on the last word. She didn't answer, and that silence was answer enough. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her lies, her guilt, and the broken pieces of whatever we used to be. The drive was a blur. City lights streaked past me in red and white smears. My hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel, my knuckles ached, but I barely felt it. My mind was a hurricane. She had looked me in the eye and told me she still loved me. And God, I wanted to believe that was true. Because if she still loved me, then maybe this wasn't real. Maybe I could wake up tomorrow and pretend none of this had happened. But it had happened. And love wasn't enough. I don't know how long I drove before I finally pulled into an empty parking lot. The world outside felt far away, like I was watching it from behind glass. I rested my head against the steering wheel, exhaling shakily. This was it. The end of us. I should have felt anger, rage, betrayal. But all I felt was exhaustion. A bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that made me realize just how long I had been fighting for something that was already gone. I should have seen this coming. The distance, the secrecy, the way she pulled away while I was still reaching for her. I had ignored the signs, convinced myself that love could fix what was breaking. But love hadn't saved us. And now, there was nothing left to save. The days after the confrontation were a blur. Emily called. She texted. She showed up at our apartment knocking softly, whispering my name through the door. I couldn't face her. Not yet. I spent my nights on my brother's couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship like a film stuck on endless repeat. The laughter, the shared dreams, the nights when we had felt like the only two people in the world. I loved her. God, I loved her. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. One evening, after a week of silence, I finally agreed to meet her. Not because I thought we could fix things, but because I needed closure. We sat across from each other at a quiet cafe. For the first time since everything fell apart, I really looked at her. She looked tired, worn down, and more than anything, she looked guilty. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said softly, staring down at her coffee cup. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. But you did. She flinched, then exhaled. I know. Silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me. Why? She hesitated, biting her lip. I don't know. I shook my head, my voice steady but cold. That's not good enough, Emily. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I guess I just felt lost. We got so comfortable, so predictable. And Jay, he was new. He made me feel different, exciting, but it wasn't real. I see that now. I let her words settle between us, trying to ignore the way they stung. So I wasn't enough, I murmured, more to myself than to her. Her eyes snapped up, wide with pain. It wasn't about that. We were everything. And I ruined it. Her breath shook as she wiped at her eyes. I would take it back if I could. I would do anything to fix this. For the first time, I believed her. I could see the regret on her face, the raw, aching sorrow in her voice. But some things can't be undone. I don't hate you, I said finally. I want to, but I don't. Her chin trembled. Does that mean? I shook my head. No, Emily, we can't come back from this. She let out a small, broken sound, and for a moment, I almost reached for her. Almost comforted the woman who had shattered me. But I didn't, because this wasn't my burden to carry anymore. We sat there for a while, saying nothing, just existing in the wreckage of what we used to be. Then, finally, I stood. She didn't ask me to stay. She just nodded, accepting what we both already knew. And I walked away. It took time, longer than I expected. Healing wasn't a straight road. It was messy, full of backslides and nights where I still woke up expecting to feel her beside me. But I learned something in the process. I learned that love isn't just passion or history or promises whispered in the dark. It's about choice. It's about waking up every day and choosing each other, no matter how easy or how hard it gets. And Emily had made her choice. So I made mine. I chose to let go. I chose to rebuild. And for the first time in a long time, I chose me. It's been a year, a full year since that night in the bar. Since I watched the woman I loved kiss another man. A year since I walked away, leaving behind the life we built, the future we planned, and the version of myself who believed that love alone was enough. In the beginning, I thought the pain would never end. It lived in me like a shadow, lurking in the quiet moments, slipping into my thoughts when I least expected it. I carried the weight of questions I would never get answers to. What if I had done something differently? What if I had seen the signs sooner? What if I had been more exciting, less predictable? But there are no answers in what-ifs, just echoes of things we can't change. For a while I was angry, not just at Emily, but at myself, for trusting her, for not noticing the distance between us, for not being enough. But in time, I realized that wasn't fair, because love isn't a transaction. It's not about being enough or not enough. It's about the choices we make when things get hard. And she made hers, and I made mine. I haven't spoken to Emily since the day I told her goodbye. I heard through mutual friends that she and Jay didn't last long after I walked away. I wasn't surprised. Some people mistake passion for love, temptation for destiny. But eventually, reality catches up. I used to wonder if she regretted it, if she ever woke up in the middle of the night and reached for me, only to find an empty space where I used to be. If she ever sat in our old apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of our life together, and wished she had chosen differently. But then I realized it didn't matter. Regret doesn't change the past, and I wasn't living in the past anymore. In the last year, I've rebuilt, not just my life, but myself. I started traveling, something I always wanted to do but never made time for. I took up boxing, channeling the anger and pain into something physical until my body ached in a way that felt good, productive. I went back to writing, pouring my thoughts onto paper instead of drowning in them. And I learned how to be alone. That was the hardest part. Not the betrayal, not the heartbreak, but learning how to exist without the person I thought I would spend forever with. Yet somewhere in the loneliness, I found clarity. I don't regret loving Emily. I don't even regret trusting her. Because despite everything, I was happy once. And maybe that's what love is, a risk, a gamble. You give someone your heart with no guarantees, no safety net, just the hope that they'll protect it. She didn't. But one day someone will. And next time, I won't love from a place of fear or desperation. I won't cling to something just because I'm afraid of losing it. Next time, I'll love with open hands, not clenched fists. Because love isn't about possession. It's about choice. And this time, I choose me. Betrayal leaves scars, but it doesn't have to define us. The real test isn't whether we can forgive the person who hurt us. It's whether we can forgive ourselves for letting them. So, what would you choose?